Yeah, Gerard Naidoo with the Construction Industry Development Board. That's a government entity set up by the Department of Public Works to both regulate and develop the industry. I've been with the CIDB now for 10 years. My portfolio is to oversee the provincial operations of the CIDB. That's our various provincial offices, our footprint into the country, and also wear the cap of overseeing the developmental role of CIDB when it comes specific to contractor development and enterprise development. My background is that I'm a built environment professional. I've actually got my basis in town and regional planning, and I've worked in both the private sector and then in the public sector government arena for about 15 years. Okay, I say we both a regulator and a developer. Regulator is in terms of an act with a whole host of regulations and prescripts that we then purport to industry and ensure compliance. We regulate by virtue firstly of a proactive approach in terms of capacitation and awareness in terms of the requirements of the act. For example, the need to register contractors, the need for officials within the government departments who are running tenders or using the public fiscus to ensure that they comply with the CIDB requirements of registered contractors and all other prescripts, for example, PE status, where development comes into play by virtue of awarding a contract to a grade lower, but with the proviso that that contractor must receive some level of support. So those are some of the regulatory aspects. From a developmental perspective, we facilitate with the various client officials and the departments and we promote the adoption of the national contractor development. In terms of regulation, we are guided by the Act 38 of 2000. That's the CIDB Act, and it has various prescripts and regulations contained therein. For example, the use of registered contractors in terms of all government projects. And from a developmental perspective, there's a PE, which is a potentially emerging contractor who can receive work one grade lower with the proviso that the government officials and the department must have offered a certain level of support, and that's a developmental. So that's both the regulatory and development in one piece of regulation. But as the purporter of development, together with Public Works, we've devised a National Contractor Development Program, the NCDP, and that has within it both an incubator model of developing contractors, and we as a CIDB then capacitate officials and government departments in terms of the specific guidelines as to how an incubator should be run, and then we oversee that process through an interaction with the client officials to ensure that there is compliance, monitoring, evaluation, and certain levels of support in running incubators. We then report to the National Minister and the Public Works family through the MINMEC, which is the Minister meeting with these MECs. Also, in terms of developmental procurement, that's where the client departments use their general procurement, their tenders, in a developmental manner, and where they wear the hat of development. And in that regard, we've got a whole host of practice notes and guides as to how clients can think differently and think developmentally when projects are put out developmentally. And that's pretty much how we then approach the development agenda, by facilitating the various development programs, as well as giving support and capacitation and creating an awareness on alternative delivery models for development. It's predominantly through outreach where we provide for support. That outreach entails interacting with both our stakeholders from the side of contractors, contractor associations, the established associations, the built environment associations. So here I'm speaking of the likes of NAFCOC, NAFB, the BBCBE, all of the emerging black contractor associations, as well as the established industry, the likes of SAFSEC, CISA, EXA, and all of those under the umbrella of the Built Environment Council, the CBE. Also then we interact with the officials from national and provincial departments through various fora, engagements, meetings, one-on-one bilateral sessions. And we then interact with municipalities predominantly through an approach that we've used using the established structures of SALGA and COCTA, as well as MISA being the Municipal Infrastructure Support Agency. So those are the platforms or the associations or the organizations through which we reach the bigger population of public sector officials. We've got structured engagements. We interact on a regular basis, biannually at least, through the Provincial Construction Development Fora. Those are meetings where all of the stakeholders come together and we share all of this information. We give updates in terms of lessons that have been learned from certain programs, new guidelines, new criteria, etc. As part of our outreach, the CIDB also regularly meets with stakeholders through our provincial stakeholder liaison meetings. Our board, executive, provincial management then interact directly with these stakeholders to hear firsthand what the issues are, which helps us to tweak certain programs, policies and guides. Thanks. Look, when it comes to actual contractual partnership agreements, the CIDB doesn't delve into forcing relationships amongst contractors and the like. So when it comes to joint venture opportunities or triple Ps in that regard, we don't want to be both referee and player in that instance. What we will do is create networking opportunity in the platforms for contractors and associations, the emerging and the established sector interact with one another. But we'd rather let that relationship evolve organically and not through any type of forced partnerships. In terms of interacting with our stakeholder base, being the constituents from the contracting fraternity, and in terms of our private sector interactions, whether it be any new piece of legislation, anything in terms of our registration criteria that we are considering refining, updating and changing, we then hold formal engagements, whether it be through the established meetings that I mentioned, the Provincial Construction Development Fora, our National Stakeholder Forum meeting, or any of the other established sessions, or one-on-one interactions with these associations and champions of the industry or captains of the industry. We would then also allow an opportunity for input through written processes, whereby formally, in terms of some of the prescriptions of our Act and regulations, we have to advertise, gazette and put out for public comment. But even before reaching that stage, we would like to have interacted extensively so that we are coming from an informed base when we bring out any new policy and regulatory changes. But the formal process then allows us to respond to any concerns or issues that might be raised by private sector or anyone in the sector. So too often the contractors are blamed for poor performance on a project. And I'm not defending contractors per se. In some instances, and our stats from our construction indicators that we did in about 2014 showed that in about 16% of instances, contractors are actually at fault, or through our survey with client departments, contractors have defaulted to some extent on projects, which is a large percentage. 84% seems to be the satisfaction level. So 16% is then the dissatisfaction level by the client officials in terms of the delivery by clients, which is something that needs to be addressed. However, likewise, we did a survey amongst the contractors to say how pleased or how dissatisfied are they with the client departments. Those are the government departments, the officials, and the officials then appoint in a number of instances consultants, and those consultants are normally built environment professionals, engineers, quantity surveyors, etc., who oversee, mentor, manage projects. And the dissatisfaction there is about 24% on the side of the actual contractors, that they are dissatisfied with either the way the tenders were put out, the specifications, the way that they were overseen, the lack of payment on time. These are all real concerns from the side of contractors, which talks to eroding away at their development and their growth, which is a serious concern, because we'd want to see that when government spends huge infrastructure budgets, that the transformation of the industry underpins the spending of that budget. So yes, you do get a big project that is delivered on time with good quality within budget, but also that the legacy that is left behind is that contractors who are associated with that project is actually developed. And that's then key in terms of the role of the built environment professionals that oversaw or project managed the various construction projects. Because right from conception, in the specifications of the way the tender was conceptualized, there should have been a proactive approach of thinking developmentally, so that alternative procurement models were utilized that supported development. Some of these could be joint ventures or subcontracting, unbundling of projects, term contracts, framework contracts. These are all methodologies that speak to development, as opposed to a project being run in the conventional way or tendered for in the conventional way. So this is the role of the built environment professionals. We would expect that they give an appropriate level of consideration in the manner in which projects are packaged, and after these projects are actually then put out to tender, that they comply with all of the CIDB requirements. For example, our register of projects and our iTender system, where they enlist these projects, they oversee the projects, and they give the contractors due recognition in terms of our contractor recognition processes, in terms of updating various information on how the project was conducted, and then they close out the project accordingly as well on our systems. And if a mentor is needed through the process of delivery of a project, that those built environment professionals or project managers offer the appropriate mentorship and support to the contractors to be able to deliver and meet the targets of delivery of a certain project. Yeah, look, in terms of the construction industry, we are a sector that comprises of in excess of 120,000 registered contractors. Of those, about 90% are at the grade 1 or the entry level. So we have to be very targeted in terms of project procurement, in terms of not creating too much of an expectation for the hopefuls or the job seekers at the entry level, whilst also not negating entry into the industry. And that's a balance that must be found. Once contractors are then graded in the CIDB system, there's a responsibility and role on the officials and the consultants and everyone else to ensure that, yes, they wear the developmental cap and they promote development through the procurement methodologies, but to what end point? And that's the key issue. One is for, and first and foremost, I would say, to ensure increased participation of the emerging sector, something that wasn't in year gone by, something that was realized in our country because of our specific history. And so that's one of the specific mandates of ensuring that when we do spend, we use the various pieces of legislation, the preferential legislation, the BBBE legislation, and we think developmentally and we think about increasing participation of the emerging sector. So first and foremost, it's targeting for specific groups and preferencing for specific groups. Here I'm talking about women-owned enterprises, youth-owned enterprises, and specifically black contractors. The other benefit is then in terms of transformation of the industry, and it's linked directly to the first in the sense that we would have to see the pyramid structure that we currently have in terms of very few higher grades who receive large amounts of projects in terms of the rand value and quantum of those projects versus a lot of emerging contractors, the smaller guys receiving much smaller projects. And how do we transform this industry to a level where the top end of the spectrum is then comprising of more black-owned enterprises? And that's talking to the issue of perhaps narrow-based transformation of the industry. But when we start looking at quality, performance, and sustainability, we start covering a broader level of how we would like to see a sustainable, transformed industry. The legacy that we would like to leave in terms of the infrastructure delivery program that's currently underway in terms of the huge multi-billion rands that are being spent over a 3 to 5 year period by government is to not only see the lasting legacy of good infrastructure which is well maintained and delivered appropriately, but also to be able to see the socio-economic needs of the country being addressed in terms of job creation, in terms of contracting companies growing, especially the smaller black-owned contracting companies, and growing to be sustainable contracting enterprises. That comes with a whole host of skills and specifically artisan skills base, and also speaks to a contracting capacity which is here that can serve the needs of our country, serve the needs of the SADC and African requirements, and also promoting the export of our enterprises beyond our borders into developing and delivering projects abroad. So when it comes to development, development naturally comes at a cost, but it should never be at the cost of quality and of performance of the contractors. So what we do as CIDB is we come up with a policy framework, the National Contractor Development Program being the specific one in this instance, which sets the parameters of what is required in terms of from the contractor side, from the side of officials, from the side of government, as well as key other stakeholders, finances and finance intermediaries, training support, mentors, the built environment professionals and the consultants that are involved in processes. We set certain specific guidelines out in terms of this framework as well. The guidelines are a broad list of a checklist of criteria that must be put in place for an appropriate incubator development program. And some of the National Contractor Development Program principles of developmental procurement are also spelled out in great detail and also supported by practice notes. And what CIDB's role is to then promote this amongst industry players, especially the government departments which put out the projects, the consultants which assist them to do so, and to ensure that these practice notes and these prescripts and the frameworks that we have in place for development are actually embraced into council, into government policies, and actually then implemented. And the role of the CIDB is to continue to promote, to facilitate, to create an awareness of these programs, to entrench it, to ensure the implementation is happening at the grassroots levels of where projects are being delivered, and then to monitor and oversee in terms of the growth of those contractors. Are they moving up the CIDB grading system? Are they delivering in terms of our contractor recognition scheme, in terms of the best practices and the standards that we've put out, and what levels of compliance are there to all of these, and towards what eventual outcome would be good quality infrastructure delivery, as well as simultaneously achieving sustainable enterprise and business development. I think a good measure of contractor development, and it's just one measure, would be to note the growth of a contractor. So if a contractor enters our grading scheme at, for example, a grade 1 or 2 level, over a period of time, we would want to see their sustainable growth in the development, maybe to a grade 3 or a 4. Also, there's a false expectation that contractors who enter at 1 or 2 might, within a short period of time, become a big grade 8 or 9 contractor able to deliver stadium and big infrastructure. That's a fallacy, and something that we have to ensure that we capacitate those contractors on in terms of what's the growth cycle and what's the business growth processes that are involved in running a successful construction company. But when it comes to good examples, we've done various surveys of contractor development programs in the country over a period of time. When we devised the National Contractor Development Program, we learned many lessons in terms of shortcomings of development programs. Some of those lessons spoke to the huge intakes, the huge amount of expectation, and inadequate number of projects to sustain contractors in those development programs, inadequate mentoring support that was being provided, contractual conflicts, etc. Those were huge challenges that compromised delivery programs of past. So when we conceptualized the NCDP and its guidelines, we were very clear in terms of drawing from those lessons. The adoption of the NCDP by national government took place in about 2008, and between 2008 and 2012, we were able to gauge a number of programs against the guidelines to ensure that there were certain levels of alignment that needed to be in place. And more recently, we've been able to now assess the programs that are out there, how have they been faring in comparison to the guidelines that were put out, and in terms of the criteria as to whether those are successful programs. As I mentioned, one of those indicators would be the upgrades of contractors on our processes or on our grading system. Examples would be in the Eastern Cape alone, as a single province, would be Kucha Development Corporation, the Department of Public Works Construction Incubator Program, Vukupile, and even EPWP, the Expanded Public Works Program of National Public Works. All of these are examples of contractor development programs, which when we did the tests in terms of this stats analysis, we saw clearly that there were in the region of about 10% of growth of contractors within those development programs. Opportunities that would not necessarily have been there previously if sustainable contracting opportunities weren't allocated to those contractors, if mentoring support and financial support and contractual support wasn't there, these contractors would unlikely have been able to deliver in terms of the requirements, the quality and the performance levels in terms of what was required on these projects. So in these instances, quality or performance was not compromised, projects were delivered, and simultaneously socioeconomic needs were met, as well as the sustainable development of those enterprises. Yeah, I think there's a lack of construction mentors, specifically a registration category that the SACPMP purports. And in that instance, in the industry, there is a clear lack of ability to deliver on successful contractor development programs in the absence of construction mentors. And that's perhaps an area that needs to be focused upon.
And in your opinion, what would be the best way to go about that?
Well, there are various accredited programs. University of Pretoria, as an example, offers a specific training program to bring professionals, built environment professionals, up to speed in terms of the requisite requirements to then be able to register as a professional construction mentor. And if there is a larger intake into those programs and there is a larger registration with the regulatory body, then we would be able to see an inflow of the required support, which would then give support to the provincial and client outreach programs and development programs. Yeah, I think there needs to be an increased level of support.
How would you go about incentivizing that increase in registrations for these programs or involvement there?
Well, what we've done as the CIDB is we've written into our guideline requirements that mentors would have to be accredited with the SACP-CMP. And in that regard, as a requirement, any development program that is being run or is being aligned to our framework would have to comply with that requirement. In terms of the incentives, what the CIDB hopes to be able to do into the future is to, at a provincial level, identify a minimum threshold of construction mentors that would be required, and then look for industry support and stakeholder support in assisting with the registration requirements of those. It might be, in some instances, accrediting them on the course that is available, or assisting, facilitating registration with the SACPMP, or it would be just identifying the requisite numbers and then ensuring that the client departments who are running these development programs give those professionals the support that is required to be registered. Yeah, it's a difficult one. Normally you'd have to, and good practice would say that you need to have practiced in the field before you can teach in the field.
Yes.
And you'd probably gain most of your experience hands-on as a practitioner, as a consultant, as an established engineer or quantity surveyor or town planner. You'd have worked in the environment, you would understand firsthand some of the challenges, and then you were going to get an accreditation to become a mentor to others. To the youth in the industry, the newcomers in the industry, the emerging contractors. So my advice would be that you'd need to establish yourself in the industry, practice, and get a level of hands-on experience before you embark on the C-mentor or the path of becoming a mentor. But that would be the progression. I think it's something maybe we need to look at. Maybe we need to look at a level of when promoting the industry to the youth, whether it be at the school levels on specific career development days, or whether it be at the university levels in construction management courses, to be able to spell out what the various options are after graduation, and somewhere down the line, mentorship and supporting of other enterprises and giving back to the industry is perhaps something we should highlight and profile. But at the moment, it's occurring organically. An engineer or built environment professional, once they reach a certain level of understanding of the industry and of the sector, and once they wish to share that information or knowledge or train in the field or become a mentor and a guide, then they embark on specific qualification or accreditation so that they can then focus on that field. Yeah, as I say, we could perhaps at the entry school level through career exposures, or at university level right at the onset at construction management courses through the induction processes, assist in career pathing to say these are the alternatives, or these are the options, or this is the evolution of a career. So yes, we could perhaps give some guidance in that regard. We haven't up to now given specific attention to career development or progression in the field, and perhaps it's part of CIDB's mandate to some extent, but I think there are other industry role players who also have a role to play in terms of that.